Hello, my name is Riley Blackwell, and I'm going to talk to you today about recent survey in Tumbling Rock Cave, a new area called the Ourboroes extension. To tell you a little bit about myself, I started caving with the VPI Cave Club near the end of 2016, and since then I've lived in both Alabama and Tennessee, so caved a lot in Tag and also in Utah, Montana, Mexico, a couple of other places. I'm very enthusiastic about aid climbing and bottom-up exploration. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today. So all the photos in this presentation were taken by Jake Lieber, unless I state otherwise. And this is kind of a co-project of me and Lee White, which you'll hear more about in a minute. So a little bit of background about Tumbling Rock. It's in Jackson County, Alabama, which is a very, very cool county for caving if you've never been there. It's owned by the Southeastern Cave Conservancy Incorporated, so that means you need a permit to visit the cave at all, and you need what's called a special use permit to bolt or set survey stations. Tumbling Rock was first mapped in 1961 by Tag cavers all the way back to a room called the Inner Sanctum, and it's the site of a historic aid climb by Don Davison and Cheryl Jones, also from the VPI Cave Club. That climb is called Topless Dome. It's 396 feet tall. At the time, I believe it was the tallest aid climb ever done in the country. Mostly Tumbling Rock looks like this. Lots of big borehole, nice formations, and full of people. This is a Nathan Williams photo, I believe. So generally when you're in Tumbling Rock, it's going to be hot and sweaty. There's going to be a lot of room. It's not muddy, it's clean, and you're usually wading through people in these large horizontal breakdown boreholes. I believe Tumbling Rock is the SCCI's most popular property, except for maybe Stevens Gap, and sees thousands and thousands and thousands of visitors a year. So here's some chunks of a very nice map by Pat Cambyses. Here's the entrance. You can see the cross section is quite large as you go all the way out past these saltpeter works, past these large formations called the Elephant's Feet, lots of breakdown mountains. Here's some more breakdown mountains. You can see to the right is the Topless Dome in profile, that big climb that Cheryl and Don did. And here's some more borehole after that. Here you go. And just before you get into this borehole, there's a little crawl called the Suicide Passage, which is not named because it makes you want to commit suicide, but rather because it used to be very unstable. I got a clarification about that from Bill Terode recently. So normally you pop out of the Suicide Passage and you go right down this Allen's Alley large borehole towards the Mount Olympus. But if you go up this slope to the left, you will see this room called the Inner Sanctum, which is quite a large room. And this lead is actually noted on the map, the waterfall coming in. That aid climb was done, I think, in the 80s, but the people who climbed it previously went straight up, like kind of in the water, and were met with a breakdown choke. And they did not climb this alternate route about, I don't know, 12 feet to the left that has a large open hole. So the early stages, Lee just kind of brought me along on this trip right after I moved to Tag. I believe the original lead may have been mentioned to him by Steve Davis. And he did this 88-foot aid climb with Jesse Hauser, I think Jesse Hauser belayed, yeah. And Steve was there, and then Damien LeBrun was also on the trip. So the climb went right away. Lee rigged it, and then Damien and I went up and climbed through some mud and some breakdown and reached a 12-foot waterfall, which was where we turned around. So the first couple of trips for rigging and exploration, the first one, Lee, Mark Wingard, Jake Lieber, and I returned with a drill and a bunch of rope. And at this point, Tumbling Rock was in high flood. Tag was experiencing a pretty historic quantity of water. There's a crack near the entrance. Many people have probably been to Tumbling Rock, so there's a crack that you step over right when you come into the cave. That had 4 feet of water in it. And the stream in the main borehole, which is normally really shallow, completely flooded our boots. So it was a very strange amount of water. Not a great time to be doing bottom-up waterfall exploration. So you can see here, this picture to the right is me on Waterfall 1 on that day. That's a Jake Lieber picture. That day where the flood was so high. So Lee and I actually just kind of threw Mark Wingard up that pit. And then he was able to free climb this waterfall that you can see Philip on Eric photo. It was really wet, so it was very impressive that Mark was able to climb this. And we had bolting gear, but not aid climbing gear. We made our way up a third waterfall in similarly fancy methods by lassoing a shale protrusion. Here's a nice picture of waterfalls 2 and 3 in low water that Jake Lieber took. So after that, we hit some very tight, sharp passage. This is the limiting factor for a lot of people who are interested in visiting the Ourboroes extension. I believe the tight spot in this area is probably about 9 inches. It's possible to do it with your vertical gear on, but it's hard and it required some hammering. Super sharp, and it has a snake skeleton on one of these ledges here. So this is actually what the whole extension, what Lee named the whole extension after. So then we ran into this waterfall, the fourth waterfall, and this is again low water, so it looked nothing like this when we climbed it. So on a subsequent trip, Jesse Hauser, Mark Wingard, and Lee and I came back, and Lee did a 3-bolt aid climb. And this aid climb was really funny. It was super short because he was able to free climb to this ledge, but it was totally overhung, and the top of it is really tight. So we got to watch him flail around for a while. So at the top of that waterfall was a bunch of paleo passage, which then we met back up with the water, and we were in a canyon about 30 feet high, chimneyed along the top of this canyon, and found 2 big domes. And at the time, Lee and I, for some reason, agreed that they were about 70 feet and 100 feet. I don't know why we were so sure about that, but we were really glad when it turned out we were wrong. So after doing this rigging, which we did beforehand because we knew it was going to be super wet and there was going to be a lot of aid climbing required and a lot of carrying of stuff, and we thought that we might have to do survey in wetsuits, I offered to sketch as much of the Ourboroes extension as I could. I had recently learned to sketch and was excited about it. And Lee wanted to do all the aid climbing, which was his favorite thing to do. So this is kind of where we figured out that that was a good arrangement for us. And we dragged a whole bunch of other people in to help over various times. There were 4 major survey trips of the main route. You can see those participants there. I told Jake that if he wanted to take pictures of the Ourboroes extension, he needed to help with the survey. So he came back and did some pieces of it that other people didn't want to do. And then at the end, some California cavers, including Sonia Meyer, came to help. There were some mop-up trips with Philip, Jake, and then this Italian caver, Lorenzo Rosato. So there were people helping with this from all over the country and the world, which I thought was pretty cool. Here's a really great picture of Lee in the chaos shaft. So this is the one of the 150-foot domes, the larger one, very picturesque. This is, I think, also lower water, or you wouldn't be able to see so much of the dome. Here it is from the bottom up. You can see how cool the shape is. So Philip and Jake and I went back to the Ourboroes extension to do some photo documentation, and then in the process of that documentation, we're kind of poking around and actually found an upper level loop with a lot of cool formations in it, including this gray radish looking thing, which I really love. So for the aid climbing, there were about 450 feet done total. Lee did it all. I cleaned and belayed a lot of it, and Mark Wingard also cleaned and belayed a whole bunch of pitches. One of those was a 6-hour hanging belay in the chaos shaft. And the chaos shaft is named the chaos shaft because in high water and even medium water, the waterfall moves around the pit and there's a ton of air. So it's a very cold, loud, unpleasant place to be. The final count for those pits is that after they were climbed and rigged. The Chaos Shaft is a 152-foot pit, and the Xylophone Dome is 148. The Chaos Shaft has 3 or 4 rebelays in it, and the Xylophone Dome has 2 and a J-hang. So they're both rigged alpine as much out of the water as possible. The inner sanctum drop, that original climb, is 88 feet, and then there are 6 other pits, or, you know, climbs. So I sent this big wrap-up email to the SCCI saying we'd finished the survey, we'd done all the climbing, the cave was rigged, and then Corey Hackley, Terry McLanathan, Elliot Stahl, and I went to Tumbling Rock so that I could get a couple details and Monk could bounce and tape the new pits. And Corey went up one of the domes into a lead that had been marked too tight by a tag caver, I won't name names, and had squeezed and slithered through some stuff, dug a hole in the floor, and found a 60-foot pit. So Lee and I were actually not happy about this. I think each of us had been like 12 or 13 times at the time, and we were starting to get in over the course of a year, less than a year, and we were starting to get sick of the commute. But of course, you know, you have to survey everything. So I ended up recruiting people who'd never been to that section before to go with me, just to add some variety. So I want to give a shout out to Aaron Hayward for doing that. We finally finished that survey after about 18 total trips, I think, between February 2018 and January 2019. Total surveyed footage is 2,148 feet. The depth from the bottom of Lee's original climb in the inner sanctum to the top of the passage terminating Chaos Shaft is 353 feet. And there's about 1,100 feet of static rope in the cave, in that part of the cave. So we hauled a lot of rope back there over the course of about 600 total man hours. Lee and I each did 14 project trips, many of those together, and then there's a list of other project participants here. We had people from Alabama, from Virginia, from Georgia, people who had come back from living in Sweden, Frenchmen, Damien, Sonia from California, and then Lorenzo from Italy, and Dustin and Alan from California as well. So we had project participants from a really wide range of places. Here's kind of like a compiled trace that I did before I had access to Caveware, just so that I could kind of show people what was going on with the project. So this starts at waterfall 2 and 3, goes through that tight passage, and then you can see the big domes at the end there. There's a lot of other side passages and significant amounts of passage going off the Xylophone Dome and the Chaos Shaft in both directions that aren't on here. So there's still stuff going on in Tumbling Rock. Mark Wingard, who did a lot of that Ourboroes exploration with us, is still climbing in there with Rachel Saker. I'm told that their projects are very fancy and secret, but feel free to ask either of them if you're curious about what's currently going on. They're also, I believe, aid climbing. I think it's really interesting that so much passage has been found in Tumbling Rock, considering how many people have gone there. And I mean that the first survey happened in 1961. So it's pretty cool that they're still doing that. For my purposes, the Ourboroes extension is climbed, rigged, and surveyed. So we're happy about that. There's some other data about this around. I wrote a really long blog post with the original trip reports that Lee and I sent, all excited, to the SCCI included in there. So that's kind of cool to read if you want to read some of Lee's words about this project. And then Steve Davis wrote an NSS News article pretty early on in this project before we had finished the survey with a lot of great pictures of Lee doing that first climb. I want to say thank you to Jake Lieber for taking these cool photos and for helping with the survey, and to Aaron Hayward and Elliot Stahl for encouraging me to go back on those 13th and 14th trips. And then I also want to thank the SCCI. It's pretty unusual that or pretty exceptional that the SCCI owns so many caves, allows cavers to access so many caves, and has a system by which we can do exploration, even relatively risky exploration, like really extensive aid climbing in the caves that they own. So I'm really grateful that that's possible, and I want to give them a shout out. They're currently, I believe, still raising money to pay for a cave they just acquired in Virginia. So if you have a little bit of spare money, please go over to the SCCI and support them. And then I want to say some memory and acknowledgement of Lee White. I refused to try to publish anything about this project in the NSS News or present on it at Tennessee Convention last year. I just didn't feel like it was the right time. And I regret that, because I think Lee would have liked more people to know about these climbs and this survey. The loss of Lee obviously is deeply felt by a lot of us, and the tag cavers who knew him best can remember him by speaking of him in grandiose terms, by putting rebelays in everything that we can, and by forcing as many people as possible to look at this picture, which he loved. I know that Lee was very proud of our work in Tumbling Rock. We spent a year of our lives caving together all the time, in this cave as well as in other caves. He did a lot of really amazing things all over the country and the world, but I know that this was something he was really enthusiastic about because he loved bottom-up exploration, specifically in tag, and he was pleased that we had found something in Tumbling Rock where other people had been looking for a long time. So I wanted to share this with everyone in memorial of him. So that's all I have to say about Tumbling Rock. If you have any questions, I have a blog online at Migratory Caving. You can also email me. I'm on Facebook. And I hope you all enjoyed.